Look what they sent us today. A Barbie doll who thinks she can play soldier.
Brett Morrison's voice boomed across the Naval Training Facility's shooting range, his massive 6'4" frame casting a shadow over the woman kneeling at lane 15. His military camo uniform stretched tight across muscular shoulders as he gestured dismissively at the blonde woman struggling with her rifle. "Hey, princess! The beauty pageant is down the street!" Emily Carter looked nothing like a military threat. Her stunning Russian features, porcelain skin dusted with natural freckles across her cheeks and nose, sharp nose bridge, and captivating blue eyes, belonged on a magazine cover, not a combat training facility. Her long blonde hair was tied in a messy high bun with loose curls framing her face, and she wore nothing more intimidating than a fitted light gray t-shirt, slim dark military pants, and scuffed brown combat boots. When she missed her third consecutive shot at the 100-meter target, the gathered elite trainees erupted in cruel laughter. "Seriously, who authorized this?" Brett continued, playing to his audience of 20 spectators. "We're supposed to be training the best of the best, not babysitting some lost civilian who probably can't even hold a weapon properly." He kicked dirt toward her position. "Pack it up, sweetheart. This isn't a place for pretty faces." Emily said nothing. She simply adjusted her grip on the M4 carbine with those delicate-looking hands and lined up another shot. The rifle cracked. Another miss. More laughter echoed across the range as phones came out to record what they assumed would be viral footage of spectacular failure. But in exactly 17 minutes, when those combat boots carried her through an impossible demonstration of skill, every single person on that range would understand they had just witnessed the most dangerous mistake of their military careers. The morning sun blazed down on the asphalt of the Naval Training Facility, where the elite of the elite came to prove their worth. This wasn't basic training. This was advanced combat certification, where Navy SEALs, Force Recon Marines, and Army Rangers competed for the most coveted assignments in special operations. The facility itself was a testament to military precision, pristine buildings arranged in perfect geometric patterns, obstacle courses that would break ordinary soldiers, and shooting ranges equipped with technology that cost more than most people's houses. Brett Morrison had dominated every competition since arriving 6 months ago. At 28, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd never met a challenge he couldn't crush through sheer physical superiority. His buzz-cut brown hair gleamed with sweat from the morning's physical training, and his green camouflage uniform bore the pristine creases of someone who took military bearings seriously. The silver name tape reading Morrison sat perfectly centered above his right breast pocket, while his left displayed an impressive array of qualification badges. "Come on, Barbie," Brett called out, his voice carrying the practiced cruelty of someone who'd found his target. "We don't have all day. Some of us actually belong here." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she ejected the spent magazine and loaded a fresh one. The movement was smooth, automatic, muscle memory from countless repetitions. But the tremor in her fingers was visible to everyone watching, and it only fed their confidence that she was exactly what she appeared to be, a lost civilian who'd somehow ended up in the wrong place. The other trainees had formed a loose semicircle around lane 15, drawn by the promise of entertainment. There was something uniquely satisfying about watching someone fail when you were part of an elite group, a confirmation of your own superiority. Phones appeared with increasing frequency, everyone eager to capture the moment for their social media feeds. "This is pathetic," muttered Trainee Williams, a stocky former Marine whose chest was nearly as wide as he was tall. "How did she even get clearance to be here? Background checks exist for a reason." Commander Hayes emerged from the range control tower, his weathered face set in permanent lines of displeasure. At 53, he'd seen every type of wannabe warrior come through these gates, and most of them washed out within the first week. He approached Emily's lane with the measured pace of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. "Miss Carter," he said, consulting his clipboard, "I'm going to need to see some identification. There seems to be some confusion about your authorization to be here." Emily looked up at him, those captivating blue eyes meeting his gaze without flinching. "My paperwork is in order, sir," she said quietly. Her voice carried a slight accent, Russian, maybe, or Eastern European, that only added to the mystery of how she'd ended up among America's finest. "I find that hard to believe," Commander Hayes replied, his tone making it clear that he considered her presence a clerical error at best. "This facility is restricted to active-duty special operations personnel and qualified civilian contractors. You don't appear to be either." The gathered crowd murmured their agreement. Emily Carter didn't look like she belonged anywhere near a military installation, let alone one where the stakes were measured in life and death. Her fitted gray t-shirt revealed a slender frame that seemed more suited to a yoga studio than a combat zone, and her delicate features suggested someone who'd never experienced real hardship. But as she lowered her head to check her rifle's chamber, something flickered across her expression. A momentary hardness that was gone so quickly, most people missed it entirely. The brass check was performed with mechanical precision, her fingers finding the ejection port without conscious thought and confirming a round was chambered before releasing the charging handle with the practiced motion of someone who'd done it thousands of times. Private Jackson stood at the edge of the crowd, uncomfortable with the spectacle, but lacking the courage to speak up. At 19, he was the youngest trainee at the facility, barely 6 months out of basic training, and still intimidated by the elite operators around him. But something about Emily's quiet dignity reminded him of his sister, the way she held herself despite the obvious hostility, the determination in her eyes even as she struggled with the rifle. "Maybe we should give her a chance," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the continuing mockery. Brett's head snapped toward him, like a predator spotting prey. "What was that, Private? You got something to say?" Jackson's face flushed red, but he met Brett's gaze. "I just think maybe she deserves a fair shot. Everyone's got to start somewhere." The laughter that followed was harsh and cutting. Brett stepped closer to Jackson, using his height advantage to intimidate. "Listen up, Boot. This isn't a charity case. Lives depend on the people who get certified here. You want to coddle someone who can't hit the broadside of a barn? That's how good soldiers end up dead." Emily continued adjusting her rifle, seemingly oblivious to the argument her presence had sparked. But those who were watching closely might have noticed the way she moved. Economical motions that wasted no energy, a calm that seemed almost unnatural given the circumstances. Most people under this kind of pressure would be showing signs of stress, rapid breathing, nervous fidgeting, defensive posturing. Emily displayed none of these tells. If you're already feeling that burn of injustice watching Emily endure this treatment, smash that like button right now. This story is about to show you why you should never, ever judge someone by their appearance. And hey, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop your country or state in the comments below. I love seeing our global community come together for these incredible stories of hidden strength. The range suddenly filled with the sound of approaching footsteps as Madison Brooks strutted onto the scene, her perfect blonde ponytail swaying with each step. Madison was the facility's self-appointed social media queen, documenting everything for her 20,000 Instagram followers who couldn't get enough of her authentic military life content. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never met a camera she didn't like. "Oh my gosh, you guys," she said, holding her phone at the perfect angle to capture both herself and the ongoing disaster at Lane 15. "This is incredible. We've got ourselves a real-life movie moment here. Some random civilian thinks she can just walk onto a military base and play soldier." She panned her camera across the crowd of laughing trainees. "The delusion is real, family." Madison's live stream was drawing viewers by the hundreds, notifications pinging constantly as comments flooded in. Her followers ate up this kind of content. Authentic military drama was much more engaging than her usual workout videos and sponsored posts. She moved closer to Emily's position, making sure to get the perfect shot of the woman's repeated failures. "Look at those hands shake," Madison narrated for her audience. "Girl probably can't even order coffee without having a panic attack, and she thinks she can handle military weapons. This is what participation trophy culture gets you, people." Emily's next shot went wide, missing the target entirely. The electronic scoring system didn't even register a hit, the display remaining stubbornly at 0. The crowd's amusement was reaching a crescendo, with more phones appearing every second. This was already shaping up to be the kind of viral content that would be shared across military social media groups for months. But Instructor Murphy, who'd been observing from the equipment shed, found himself studying Emily with growing puzzlement. Murphy had been running weapons training at elite facilities for 15 years, and he had developed an eye for separating the genuinely incompetent from those who were struggling with specific issues. Something about Emily's shooting stance was bothering him. It was too perfect, too textbook, despite her obvious difficulties with accuracy. Her feet were positioned exactly shoulder-width apart, weight distributed evenly between both legs. Her non-firing hand gripped the handguard at precisely the right position to control muzzle rise. Even her breathing pattern, inhale, exhale, halfway, hold, fire, was exactly what they taught in advanced marksmanship courses. These weren't the habits of someone who had never held a rifle before. "Carter," Murphy called out, approaching her lane, "let me see that weapon." Emily immediately made the rifle safe, engaging the safety and pointing the muzzle downrange before handing it over. Again, the movement was automatic, drilled so deeply into muscle memory that she didn't have to think about it. Murphy examined the M4 carefully, checking the barrel alignment, and the trigger mechanism. "When's the last time this rifle was zeroed?" he asked the range sergeant. "Should be good to go, sir. We zero all weapons monthly." Murphy frowned, squinting down the barrel. This sight is off by at least 3 inches at 100 meters. No wonder she can't hit anything. He looked at Emily with newfound interest. "How long have you been shooting?" "A while," Emily replied quietly, accepting the rifle back and immediately performing another brass check before settling into her firing position. The simplicity of her answer only deepened Murphy's curiosity. Most civilians would have launched into their entire shooting history. Hunting trips with Dad, visits to local ranges, maybe some competition experience. Emily gave him nothing, just those 2 words delivered with the kind of understated confidence he usually associated with his most experienced operators. Brett wasn't about to let this moment of potential vindication pass without comment. "Oh, so now it's the rifle's fault? That's convenient. What's next? Gonna blame the wind? The lighting? Maybe the target's too far away for a delicate little princess?" "Actually," Murphy said, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in uniform, "shooting with a misaligned sight takes considerable skill to compensate for. The fact that she's getting close to the target at all suggests she knows what she's doing." This observation fell on deaf ears. The crowd was too invested in the spectacle to consider that there might be more to the story. Emily had been cast in the role of incompetent outsider, and nothing short of a miracle was going to change their minds. Emily's hands continued their subtle tremor as she lined up her next shot, but the movement seemed to follow a pattern, rhythmic, controlled, almost like she was compensating for the shake rather than fighting against it. She fired again, and this time the shot hit the outer edge of the target. A groan went up from the crowd, disappointed that their entertainment might be coming to an end. "Lucky shot," Brett declared immediately. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day." But Emily was already adjusting her sight picture, making minute corrections that spoke to an understanding of ballistics that shouldn't exist in someone struggling with basic marksmanship. Her next shot moved closer to center, and the one after that was even better. The improvement was too consistent to be random chance, too methodical to be luck. Private Jackson found himself leaning forward, genuinely curious now about what was happening at Lane 15. He'd grown up hunting with his grandfather, and he recognized the signs of someone who truly understood their weapon. The way Emily held the rifle, the way she controlled her breathing, even the way she called her shots before checking the target. These were the habits of an experienced marksman, not a nervous beginner. Captain Brooks chose that moment to make his appearance, striding onto the range with the confident gait of someone accustomed to command. Brooks was everything a Navy SEAL officer should be: tall, physically imposing, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing perfect, and his reputation among the trainees was legendary. He had supposedly led more classified missions than any other officer at the facility. But Brooks's interest in the situation at Lane 15 wasn't purely professional. He positioned himself where he could observe both Emily and the crowd's reaction to her, his expression unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. When he caught Brett's eye, he gave an almost imperceptible nod, a gesture so subtle that only someone looking for it would notice. Brett's confidence seemed to surge after that brief interaction. He stepped closer to Emily's position, deliberately invading her personal space. "You know what, Princess? I think it's time for a real test. Anyone can get lucky with a stationary target. Let's see how you handle some pressure." Without waiting for permission, Brett began setting up an impromptu challenge. He grabbed a training mannequin from the equipment shed and dragged it to the 50-meter line, positioning it at an angle that would make it a more difficult target. Then he started a timer on his phone, setting it for 30 seconds. 30 seconds, 5 shots, that target, he announced to the gathered crowd. Miss even once, and you pack up and leave. This isn't a game, and we're not here to hold anyone's hand. Commander Hayes opened his mouth to object. This wasn't standard protocol, and he didn't appreciate trainees taking it upon themselves to modify training exercises. But Captain Brooks caught his eye and shook his head slightly. a gesture that suggested this impromptu test had his backing. Emily looked at the target, then at the timer, then at Brett's expectant face. For the first time since arriving at the range, she smiled, just a slight upturn at the corners of her mouth, but enough to suggest that she found something amusing about the situation. 30 seconds? She asked quietly. Too much pressure for you? Brett sneered. We can make it easier if you want. Maybe give you a minute, or use a bigger target. Whatever makes the princess comfortable. Emily's smile faded, replaced by something harder, more focused. She loaded a fresh magazine with movements that seemed almost too smooth, too practiced. The brass check was performed with mechanical precision, and when she settled into her firing position, every trace of nervousness was gone. The timer started, and Emily's first shot rang out immediately. Center mass on the mannequin. The second shot followed less than 2 seconds later, hitting the same spot. By the fifth shot, she'd put all 5 rounds through a grouping that could be covered by a playing card, and the timer still showed 12 seconds remaining. The silence that followed was deafening. Phones that had been recording expectantly now captured nothing but stunned faces and open mouths. Brett stared at the target as if it might suddenly reveal that this had all been an elaborate trick. Emily's specialized shooting stabilization system featured advanced biometric monitoring technology with real-time heart rate analysis and micro-tremor compensation algorithms. Originally developed for military snipers operating under extreme stress conditions, these sophisticated medical monitoring devices could track vital signs and automatically adjust equipment settings to maintain peak performance even during high-pressure combat scenarios that would overwhelm standard civilian technology completely. Fluke, Brett said finally, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. Nobody shoots that well with a misaligned sight. She must have done something to the rifle. Instructor Murphy stepped forward and examined the target through his binoculars. 5 shots, 1 hole, with a sight that's 3 inches off at 100 meters. He lowered the binoculars and looked at Emily with newfound respect. Ma'am, where exactly did you learn to shoot like that? Practice, Emily replied, using the same understated tone she'd employed before. She made the rifle safe and ejected the magazine, performing each action with the fluid efficiency that comes from endless repetition. The crowd was beginning to murmur now, the easy laughter of moments before replaced by confused whispers. This wasn't what they'd expected. Emily Carter was supposed to be their morning entertainment, not a source of genuine mystery. Phones were still recording, but now they were capturing something very different. The first cracks in a story they thought they understood. Madison Brooks found herself at a loss for words for the first time in her social media career. Her live stream viewers were flooding the comments with questions she couldn't answer, theories she couldn't confirm or deny. The narrative had shifted so abruptly that she wasn't sure how to frame it for her audience. So, that was unexpected, she told her phone, trying to maintain her usual confident tone. I guess sometimes people surprise you. We're still figuring out what's going on here. Family, stay tuned. But the surprises were just beginning. Emily's next actions would shake the confidence of everyone present, revealing skills that no civilian should possess and raising questions that would demand answers. The tremor in her hands hadn't disappeared, but now it seemed less like nervousness and more like something else entirely, a physical reminder of trials faced and survived. Brett Morrison felt the first flutter of uncertainty in his chest, though he was far too proud to show it. Everything about this situation was wrong. Emily Carter looked like she should be modeling cosmetics, not threading needles with rifle shots. The disconnect between her appearance and her demonstrated abilities was creating a cognitive dissonance that made him angry and confused in equal measure. Captain Brooks watched the proceedings with growing interest, his earlier amusement replaced by something more calculating. This wasn't going according to plan. Emily was supposed to fail, to wash out quietly and disappear before anyone started asking inconvenient questions. Instead, she was drawing attention, demonstrating capabilities that could complicate everything. He caught Brett's eye again and made a subtle gesture, a slight movement of his hand that conveyed clear instructions. Brett nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding passing between them. If Emily wasn't going to fail on her own, she'd need help. The tension is building, isn't it? If you're starting to suspect Emily isn't what she appears to be, hit that subscribe button because you have excellent instincts. What happens next is going to blow your mind, and I promise you don't want to miss how this unfolds. The next phase of training involved equipment maintenance, and Emily found herself assigned to a station with a disassembled EM4 carbine. The task was straightforward: completely break down the weapon, clean all components, identify any defects or wear patterns, and reassemble it to military specifications. Most trainees needed 45 minutes to an hour for this exercise. Emily approached the task with the same quiet focus she'd shown on the firing line. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, field stripping the rifle in under 2 minutes. Each component was examined carefully, cleaned methodically, and laid out in a precise pattern that would allow for rapid reassembly. But as she worked, something became apparent to those watching closely. The tremor in her hands wasn't random. It followed a specific pattern, as if her nervous system had adapted to work with the condition rather than despite it. When she picked up small springs and pins, the shake seemed to help her guide them into position with microscopic precision. Instructor Murphy found himself drawn to her station, fascinated by the contradiction between her apparent disability and her obvious expertise. "Most people with hand tremors can't perform detail work like this," he observed. "You adapt," Emily replied simply, not looking up from her work. It was then that Murphy noticed the small scars on her hands, thin white lines that could only come from repeated exposure to sharp metal under pressure. These weren't the marks of someone who occasionally cleaned a hunting rifle. These were the hands of someone who had performed field maintenance under combat conditions, where a malfunctioning weapon meant death. Brett had been watching Emily's progress with growing frustration. His own equipment maintenance was proceeding normally, but the woman who was supposed to be incompetent was clearly outpacing him. Her rifle was already reassembled and undergoing function checks while he was still cleaning his bolt carrier group. "Beginner's luck," he muttered to trainee Williams. "Probably watched some YouTube videos and thinks she's an expert." But Williams wasn't so sure anymore. He'd been in the military long enough to recognize the difference between book learning and hard-earned experience. Emily's movements had the unconscious competence that only came from thousands of repetitions under stress. She wasn't thinking about what to do next. Her hands knew. The function check was where most trainees ran into trouble. The M4's action had to cycle smoothly, with no binding or hesitation. The trigger had to break cleanly, and the safety had to engage positively. Emily's rifle passed every test flawlessly, cycling with the smooth precision of a factory-fresh weapon. "Time," called Instructor Murphy. 18 minutes, Emily said quietly, setting her rifle aside. Murphy checked his stopwatch and frowned. 18 minutes flat. That's a facility record, by a significant margin. The previous record had been held by a Force Recon Marine with 12 years of experience. Emily had beaten it by 7 minutes, and she'd done it while dealing with a hand tremor that should have made fine motor control nearly impossible. The crowd that had gathered to watch her earlier failures was now silent, processing what they'd witnessed. This wasn't a fluke anymore. This was consistent performance at a level that shouldn't exist in someone with Emily's apparent background. Captain Brooks stepped forward, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. "Ms. Carter, I'd like to have a word with you privately." Emily looked up at him, those captivating blue eyes meeting his gaze steadily. "Of course, sir." They walked to a quiet corner of the range, away from the curious stares and whispered conversations. Brooks positioned himself so that their conversation couldn't be overheard, but where he could still maintain visual contact with Brett Morrison. "You're creating quite a stir," Brooks said, his tone carefully neutral. "I'm just doing the exercises as assigned, sir." Brooks studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. Emily's expression remained pleasantly blank, the same mild confusion she'd worn all morning. But there was something in her eyes, a depth that suggested she was far more aware of what was happening than she let on. "Your performance today has been unexpected," Brooks continued. "I have to wonder what brings someone with your obvious skills to a facility like this." "I'm here to train, sir, same as everyone else." The answer was maddeningly neutral, giving Brooks nothing to work with. He'd hoped to provoke some kind of reaction, to get her to reveal whatever agenda had brought her here. Instead, he was getting the same practiced evasion he had seen from professional operators who knew how to maintain operational security. "Well," he said finally, "I hope you understand that training here can be quite demanding. Not everyone who starts the program finishes it. Sometimes it's better to recognize your limitations early and find a path that's more suitable." Emily tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. "I appreciate the advice, sir. I'll keep it in mind." Brooks nodded and walked away, but not before making eye contact with Brett Morrison and giving another subtle signal. The message was clear. The gentle approach hadn't worked. It was time to escalate. Emily returned to her station, where Private Jackson was waiting, with obvious curiosity. He'd been watching the interaction with Captain Brooks, and something about the body language had struck him as wrong. Brooks hadn't looked like a senior officer offering guidance to a struggling trainee. He'd looked like someone conducting an interrogation. "Everything okay?" Jackson asked quietly. Emily smiled, and for a moment the expression transformed her entire face. The slight tension around her eyes disappeared, and she looked genuinely pleased by his concern. "Everything's fine," she said. "Thank you for asking." It was such a simple exchange, but it revealed something important about Emily Carter. Beneath the mystery and the contradictions, she was still fundamentally human. She appreciated kindness, and she wasn't so focused on whatever mission had brought her here that she couldn't spare a moment for basic courtesy. The morning's exercises continued with combat movement drills, designed to test how trainees would perform while under stress. The course was laid out like a small town, with buildings, alleyways, and obstacles that simulated urban combat environments. Trainees had to navigate from point to point while maintaining tactical awareness and responding to simulated threats. Emily's performance in this phase was unlike anything the instructors had seen before. She moved through the course with an economy of motion that suggested deep familiarity with urban combat environments. Her route selection was optimal, avoiding obvious kill zones and maintaining cover wherever possible. When she encountered simulated threats, her responses were instantaneous and devastatingly effective. But it was the small details that caught the attention of the more experienced observers. The way she checked corners before rounding them, the way she moved through doorways without silhouetting herself, the way she maintained situational awareness even while focused on immediate objectives. These were skills that took years to develop, and they were usually learned in places where mistakes carried deadly consequences. Brett Morrison was struggling with the course, his earlier confidence shaken by Emily's continued surprises. He'd trained on similar layouts dozens of times, but today his timing was off, his movements clumsy. The knowledge that a woman he'd dismissed as incompetent was outperforming him was eating away at his focus. When he reached the final obstacle, a wall that required precise timing to scale, his frustration finally boiled over. Instead of completing the course properly, he took a shortcut, vaulting over a barrier that was supposed to simulate a building wall. It was a minor violation, but it was noticed by the observing instructors. "Morrison," Instructor Murphy called out. "That's a course violation. You know better than that." Brett's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Sorry, sir. Lost my focus for a second." But the damage was done. His perfect record had been tarnished, and everyone had seen it happen. Worse, Emily Carter had completed the course flawlessly, in record time, without breaking a single rule. The Naval Training Facility maintained comprehensive liability insurance coverage through specialized defense contractors, protecting against potential lawsuits from training accidents and misconduct incidents. These military-specific insurance policies included coverage for equipment damage, personnel injuries, and institutional reputation management that could cost millions in legal fees and settlements if training protocols were violated or discrimination claims were filed against command staff. As the afternoon wore on, a pattern began to emerge. Every exercise that was supposed to expose Emily's limitations instead revealed new areas of expertise. Her map reading was flawless. Her first aid skills were advanced beyond anything taught in civilian courses. Her knowledge of military protocols and procedures was encyclopedic. Commander Hayes found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. His initial assessment of Emily as a lost civilian was clearly wrong, but he had no idea what the correct assessment should be. Her personnel file was remarkably thin, basic biographical information, a few references that checked out when called, but nothing that explained her obvious military training. He decided to run a more thorough background check, accessing databases that required special clearance. If Emily Carter was who she claimed to be, the search would confirm it. If she wasn't, it might reveal what she was hiding. The computer search began normally, processing Emily's social security number and basic identifying information. But when the system tried to access her military records, it hit a wall. Access denied. Classification level insufficient. The kind of message that usually appeared when someone tried to access information about active special operations personnel. Hayes stared at the screen, his mind racing. There were only a few reasons why a background check would hit a classification barrier. Either Emily Carter was involved in ongoing special operations, or she was part of a program so sensitive that even her existence was classified. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. "This is Commander Hayes at the Naval Training Facility. I need a priority personnel verification. Subject name, Emily Carter. Date of birth." He rattled off the information from Emily's file, then waited while the other end of the line ran their own search. The response, when it came, was troubling. "Commander, we're showing no record of that individual in any of our databases. Are you sure you have the correct information?" Hayes double-checked Emily's paperwork, but everything was exactly as he'd reported it. According to the Navy's own personnel system, Emily Carter didn't exist, but she was standing 50 yards away, cleaning her rifle with the competence of a 20-year veteran. Something was very wrong. Private Jackson had been observing Emily throughout the day, and his initial sympathy had evolved into genuine admiration. She handled every challenge with the same quiet competence, never boasting about her successes or complaining about the continued hostility from other trainees. There was a dignity about her that reminded him of his grandfather, a World War II veteran who'd never talked about his experiences but carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who'd faced death and prevailed. "You served before, didn't you?" Jackson asked during a brief break between exercises. Emily looked at him with those penetrating blue eyes, and for a moment he thought she might answer honestly. But then the familiar mask slipped back into place. "No," she said simply. "This is my first time on a military base." It was clearly a lie, but Jackson didn't press the issue. If Emily Carter wanted to keep her secrets, that was her business. He just hoped that whatever had brought her here wouldn't put her in danger. Brett Morrison had spent the afternoon in a steadily darkening mood. Each of Emily's successes felt like a personal affront, a challenge to everything he believed about himself and his place in the military hierarchy. He'd built his entire identity around being the best, the strongest, the most capable trainee at the facility. Emily's presence threatened that identity in ways he wasn't equipped to handle. Captain Brooks had been watching Brett's deteriorating emotional state with growing concern. The young trainee was becoming unpredictable, and unpredictable people were dangerous to carefully laid plans. It might be time to cut losses and find another approach to the Emily Carter problem. But first, he needed to know exactly who he was dealing with. Brooks had his own contacts in the intelligence community, people who could access information that was beyond Commander Hayes' clearance level. He sent a series of encrypted messages, calling in favors that he had been saving for years. The responses, when they came, were disturbing. Emily Carter existed in the civilian databases, Social Security records, tax returns, even a driver's license photo that matched the woman currently at his facility. But there were gaps in her history that suggested careful construction rather than natural accumulation. Someone had built Emily Carter's identity with professional skill, creating a legend that would pass casual inspection while hiding whatever truth lay beneath. Brooks felt a chill run down his spine. If Emily was an intelligence operative, her presence here could only mean one thing. Someone suspected him of wrongdoing. His carefully maintained network of corruption and influence was built on the assumption that he was above suspicion. If that assumption was wrong, everything he had worked for could come crashing down. As the day's exercises concluded, Emily found herself the center of unwanted attention. Trainees who had been laughing at her that morning were now watching her with wary respect. Instructors who had dismissed her as a curiosity were asking pointed questions about her background. The anonymity she'd apparently been counting on was evaporating rapidly. Madison Brooks approached with her phone still recording, though her earlier smugness had been replaced by confusion. "Emily, I have to ask, where did you learn to shoot like that? I mean, your performance today has been incredible, but this morning you could barely hit the target." Emily's smile was polite but revealed nothing. "I guess I just needed to warm up." It was another non-answer, but Madison's viewers were eating it up. The comments were flying faster than she could read them, theories and speculation building as people tried to make sense of what they'd witnessed. Some suggested Emily was a secret government agent. Others thought she might be a veteran suffering from PTSD who'd forgotten her training until muscle memory kicked in. A few even proposed that the entire day had been an elaborate prank. But the truth, whatever it was, remained locked behind Emily's enigmatic smile and those captivating blue eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. As the sun began to set over the naval training facility, casting long shadows across the parade ground, Emily Carter packed her gear with the same methodical precision she'd shown all day. Her hands still trembled slightly, but now the movement seemed less like a weakness and more like a rhythm, a physical reminder of something that had been overcome rather than something that limited her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for her to prove herself or reveal her secrets. But tonight, as the trainees headed to their quarters and the instructors filed their reports, one thing was certain. Emily Carter was not what she appeared to be, and the truth, when it finally emerged, would change everything. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that promised either triumph or disaster. Emily Carter stood in formation with the other trainees at 0600 hours, her fitted gray t-shirt and combat boots making her look as out of place as ever among the sea of military precision. But something had shifted overnight. The easy mockery of the previous day had been replaced by wary curiosity, and more than one trainee found themselves stealing glances at the woman who'd shattered every assumption they'd held about her. Brett Morrison's confidence had returned with the sunrise, bolstered by a private conversation with Captain Brooks that had left him convinced today would be different. Brooks had assured him that Emily's performance yesterday was nothing more than beginner's luck, combined with modified exercises that played to her strengths. Today's challenges would be different, more demanding, more realistic, and designed to expose whatever weaknesses she was hiding. "Listen up, people," Commander Hayes announced, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Today we're moving to advanced tactical scenarios, live fire exercises, urban combat simulations, and stress testing under combat conditions. This isn't a game, and there's no participation trophy for showing up." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled trainees. When his eyes found Emily, they lingered for a moment longer than professional courtesy demanded. The background check from yesterday had raised more questions than it answered, and Hayes was determined to get to the bottom of the mystery surrounding Emily Carter. "Your first exercise is building clearance," Hayes continued. "Teams of 4, live ammunition, simulated hostage scenarios. Rules of engagement are strict. Positive identification required before firing. Civilian casualties result in immediate failure." He consulted his clipboard. "Morrison, Carter, Williams, and Jackson. You're Team Alpha." Brett's smile was predatory as he heard the team assignments. This was perfect. He'd be able to watch Emily up close, document her failures, and finally expose whatever game she was playing. Better yet, if she made any mistakes that endangered the team, he'd have justification for more aggressive intervention. Emily accepted the team assignment without comment, but Private Jackson caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she understood exactly what was happening. Someone was stacking the deck against her, and they weren't being subtle about it. The building clearance facility was a maze of interconnected rooms designed to simulate a terrorist-held apartment complex. Mannequins representing hostages were scattered throughout, along with pop-up targets that would test reaction time and accuracy under stress. The entire scenario was monitored by cameras and sensors that would record every movement, every shot, every decision. "Standard stack formation," Brett announced, automatically assuming leadership of the team. "Williams, your point. Jackson, rear security. Princess here can stay in the middle where she won't get in the way." Emily's position in the formation was clearly intended as an insult. The middle was typically reserved for wounded personnel or non-combatants who needed protection, but she took her assigned place without protest, checking her weapon one final time before they breached the first door. The moment they entered the building, everything changed. The Emily Carter who'd seemed lost and uncertain yesterday disappeared, replaced by someone who moved through the simulated combat zone with lethal grace. Her weapon was always pointed in a safe direction, her muzzle discipline perfect even under stress. When targets appeared, her responses were instantaneous and precise. But it was her tactical awareness that truly set her apart. She seemed to know where threats would appear before they materialized, positioning herself to cover angles that the others missed. When Williams hesitated at a doorway, uncertain about what lay beyond, Emily was already moving to clear the room, with movements so fluid they looked choreographed. "Contact left," Williams called out, as a target popped up in his peripheral vision. Emily's rifle was on target and fired before Williams had finished the word contact. The simulated terrorist went down with a perfect center mass hit, and Emily was already scanning for additional threats before the electronic scoring system had registered her shot. Brett watched this display with growing unease. Everything about Emily's performance screamed professional military training of the highest caliber. This wasn't someone who had learned to shoot at weekend courses or civilian training programs. This was someone who had been forged in real combat, where hesitation meant death and mistakes were measured in body counts. The team moved through the building with increasing efficiency, Emily's presence transforming their performance from competent to exceptional. She seemed to anticipate their needs, covering their blind spots and communicating through subtle gestures that suggested intimate familiarity with small unit tactics. When they reached the final room, a hostage scenario with multiple civilians and armed terrorists in close proximity, Emily finally spoke for the first time since entering the building. "Wait," she said quietly, her voice carrying absolute authority despite its soft tone. Brett was already moving toward the door, his weapon raised and ready to breach. "What? We don't have time for—" "Look at the shadows," Emily interrupted, pointing to the floor beneath the door. "Two additional hostiles, positions marked by their foot placement. Breach now, and you'll walk into a crossfire." Brett studied the shadows she'd indicated, seeing nothing but meaningless shapes on the floor. But Williams and Jackson were already repositioning themselves, recognizing the tactical wisdom in Emily's observation, even if they couldn't see what she was seeing. "How do you know?" Brett demanded. Emily's response was delivered with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "Ambient light source is coming from the right side of the room, casting shadows at a 45-degree angle. The shadow patterns indicate two individuals positioned to create overlapping fields of fire at the entrance. Standard ambush configuration." The explanation was delivered in the calm, clinical tone of someone who'd analyzed dozens of similar scenarios under actual combat conditions. Brett felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized he was listening to someone with genuine tactical expertise that far exceeded his own. They modified their approach based on Emily's assessment, using coordinated movement to neutralize the threats without endangering the hostages. The exercise concluded with perfect scores across all metrics: accuracy, tactical decision-making, team coordination, and civilian protection. As they emerged from the building, Brett found himself struggling with cognitive dissonance that made him physically uncomfortable. Everything he thought he knew about Emily Carter was wrong, but admitting that would mean acknowledging that his own assessment abilities were flawed. His ego wouldn't allow that possibility. "Lucky guesses," he muttered to Williams as they headed to the equipment turn-in point. "Anyone can get lucky once." But Williams wasn't buying it anymore. He'd been watching Emily's performance throughout the exercise, and luck didn't explain the consistent excellence he'd witnessed. "Brett, man, I think we need to consider that maybe we misjudged her. That woman knows what she's doing." Brett's response was sharp and defensive. "Don't let her fool you. I've seen this before. Civilians who watch too many movies and think they understand military tactics. Give her a real challenge, and she'll fold like a house of cards. Hold on to your seats, because we're about to hit the moment that changes everything. If you're invested in seeing Emily prove these bullies wrong, that notification bell is your best friend right now. Trust me, the next few minutes will be absolutely worth it." Captain Brooks had been monitoring the building clearance exercise from the control room, and Emily's performance had confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't a civilian playing soldier. This was a professional operator of the highest caliber, someone whose skills had been honed in environments where mistakes carried deadly consequences. Her presence at his facility could only mean one thing: someone suspected him of wrongdoing. The network of corruption Brooks had built over the past 5 years was sophisticated and profitable. Training contracts awarded to companies that kicked back percentages to his offshore accounts. Equipment procurements that favored suppliers who understood the value of gratitude. Personnel assignments that could be influenced by the right combination of pressure and incentives. It was all carefully balanced, sustainable, and supposedly invisible to oversight. But if Emily Carter was an investigator, that balance was about to collapse. Brooks needed to act quickly to protect his interests, and that meant eliminating the threat before it could fully manifest. Brett Morrison was the perfect tool for this purpose. Ambitious, easily manipulated, and desperate enough to take risks if properly motivated. Brooks found Brett at the equipment shed, still processing his team's unexpected success in the building clearance exercise. The young trainee's frustration was visible in every line of his body, his earlier confidence replaced by confusion and wounded pride. "Morrison," Brooks called out, his tone suggesting this was a casual encounter rather than a carefully orchestrated intervention. "Walk with me." They moved away from the other trainees, following a path that led toward the facility's administrative buildings. Brooks waited until they were well out of earshot before beginning his manipulation. "I've been watching your team's performance today," he said, his voice carrying the weight of senior authority. "Impressive work in there. Your tactical leadership was exactly what I'd expect from someone with your potential. Brett's chest swelled with pride at the praise from such a respected officer. Thank you, sir. The team performed well. Yes, they did, Brooks agreed. Though I have to say, I'm concerned about some of the dynamics I observed. Carter's performance was unexpected. The comment was delivered with just the right mix of professional concern and subtle suggestion. Brooks had learned long ago that the most effective manipulation involved leading people to conclusions rather than forcing them. Sir, Brett prompted, hungry for validation of his own suspicions. I can't shake the feeling that there's something off about her, Brooks continued. The skills she displayed today, those don't come from civilian training. Someone with that level of tactical awareness has military experience, probably significant combat experience. But her records show nothing. Brett nodded eagerly, finally hearing someone else voice the doubts that had been eating at him. I thought the same thing, sir. Nobody learns to shoot like that without serious training. Brooks stopped walking and turned to face Brett directly, his expression grave. Here's what concerns me, Morrison. If Carter is hiding military experience, why? What's her real purpose here? Is she gathering intelligence on our training methods, our personnel, our security protocols? The implications hung in the air between them, carefully planted seeds that would grow into the kind of paranoia Brooks needed to motivate his pawn. Brett's face was already showing signs of anger and suspicion as he processed the possibilities. What do you want me to do, sir? Brett asked. Keep watching her, Brooks replied. Document anything unusual. If she's here under false pretenses, we need to know about it before she can compromise security or endanger personnel. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, giving Brett official justification for the harassment he already wanted to pursue, while framing it as a matter of national security. Brooks could see the young man's psychology shifting, transforming personal resentment into patriotic duty. The afternoon's exercises moved to the outdoor ranges, where precision shooting at extended distances would test marksmanship under realistic field conditions. The targets were placed at various ranges from 200 to 800 meters, designed to simulate the kind of long-range engagements that special operations personnel might face in combat. Emily approached the firing line with the same quiet confidence she'd shown all day, but something had changed in the atmosphere around her. Brett's team leadership had become more aggressive, his orders sharper and less professional. He was no longer content to simply watch her perform. He was actively looking for ways to undermine her success. Carter, he barked as she settled into her firing position. You're using the wrong sling configuration. Adjust it properly or you'll throw off your natural point of aim. Emily looked askance at her rifle sling, which was configured exactly as prescribed in the training manual. Sir, the configuration is correct according to... Don't argue with me, Brett interrupted. I'm the team leader, and I'm telling you to fix it. Are you refusing to follow orders? The exchange was drawing attention from other trainees, who recognized Brett's behavior as unprofessional bullying disguised as military discipline. Private Jackson started to speak up in Emily's defense, but she caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. No, sir, Emily replied calmly. I'll adjust the sling as you've instructed. She reconfigured the sling according to Brett's specifications, which would actually make accurate shooting more difficult by creating tension that would pull the rifle off target. But she made the adjustment without complaint, accepting the sabotage with the same serene composure she'd shown all day. The first target was at 300 meters, a challenging shot under ideal conditions, nearly impossible with the handicap Brett had imposed. Emily settled into her position, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth precision that had become her trademark. The shot was perfect, despite the sling configuration that should have pulled her aim off target. The electronic scoring system registered a 10-ring hit, and the gathered observers murmured their appreciation for the marksmanship they had witnessed. Brett's face flushed red with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Fluke shot, he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Let's see her do it again. Emily's second shot was even better than the first, hitting the exact center of the target with mechanical precision. The third shot followed suit, and by the time she'd completed the exercise, she'd achieved a perfect score despite the deliberate sabotage. Instructor Murphy approached the firing line, his expression troubled. He'd observed Brett's interference with Emily's equipment and recognized it for what it was, unprofessional conduct that had no place in military training. Morrison, he said sharply, a word. They moved away from the firing line, and Murphy's voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen too much military service to tolerate amateur-hour politics. "What you did back there was completely inappropriate," he said. "Deliberately compromising another trainee's equipment is not leadership. It's sabotage." Brett's response was defensive and increasingly desperate. "Sir, I was testing her adaptability. Real combat situations don't always provide ideal equipment configurations." "That's nonsense, and you know it," Murphy replied. "You were trying to make her fail, and when that didn't work, you made yourself look foolish in front of the entire group." The dressing down was delivered in front of enough witnesses to ensure that Brett's behavior would become common knowledge throughout the facility. His reputation as a professional leader was taking damage that would be difficult to repair, and the knowledge of this failure was eating away at his self-control. As the afternoon exercises continued, Emily's performance remained consistently exceptional, while Brett's became increasingly erratic. His shooting was off, his tactical decisions were poor, and his leadership was becoming more authoritarian as his confidence eroded. The other trainees were beginning to distance themselves from him, recognizing that his vendetta against Emily was compromising the team's effectiveness. The Naval Training Facility maintained comprehensive liability insurance coverage through specialized defense contractors, protecting against potential lawsuits from training accidents and misconduct incidents. These military-specific insurance policies included coverage for equipment damage, personnel injuries, and institutional reputation management that could cost millions in legal fees and settlements if training protocols were violated or discrimination claims were filed against command staff. Private Jackson found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. His sympathy for Emily had evolved into genuine respect, but Brett's behavior was becoming dangerous. The team dynamic was breaking down, and someone was going to get hurt if the situation continued to escalate. During a brief break between exercises, Jackson approached Emily privately. "On a pas ici," away from Brett's watchful eyes. "Emily," he said quietly, "I think you should know that Brett's been talking to Captain Brooks about you. I don't know what they're planning, but it doesn't seem good." Emily's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those captivating blue eyes, a sharpness that suggested she was processing this information through filters that weren't entirely civilian. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. "I appreciate the warning." Jackson wanted to say more, to ask the questions that had been building in his mind all day, but Emily's demeanor suggested that such inquiries wouldn't be welcome. Instead, he settled for offering whatever protection he could provide. "If you need someone to back you up, I'm here," he said. "What Brett's doing isn't right, and I won't stand by and watch it happen." Emily's smile was genuine and warm, transforming her entire face. "You're a good man, Private Jackson. Your family should be proud." The comment carried an odd weight, as if Emily had personal knowledge of Jackson's family situation. But before he could ask what she meant, Brett was calling the team back to formation for the next exercise. Commander Hayes had spent the afternoon reviewing Emily's personnel file and comparing it to her demonstrated performance. The discrepancies were impossible to ignore. According to her records, Emily Carter was a 28-year-old civilian with no military experience, limited firearms training, and a background in administrative work. But the woman he'd observed today was a tactical expert with skills that suggested years of advanced military training. His attempts to verify her background had hit bureaucratic walls at every turn. Phone calls to supposed former employers went unanswered. References that looked legitimate on paper turned out to be disconnected numbers or forwarding services. Even her educational records seemed suspicious. Transcripts that were technically accurate but lacked the kind of detailed annotation that typically accompanied genuine academic documentation. Hayes was beginning to suspect that Emily Carter's entire identity was a carefully constructed fiction, but he couldn't understand the purpose behind such an elaborate deception. If she was a foreign intelligence operative, why would she expose herself by demonstrating advanced military skills? If she was an undercover federal agent, why wasn't he being briefed on her mission? The only thing that made sense was that Emily's presence was connected to something happening at the facility that he wasn't aware of. Hayes decided to expand his investigation, looking not just at Emily's background, but at recent events and personnel changes that might explain why someone would send a covert operative to his command. The final exercise of the day was close-quarters combat training, designed to test hand-to-hand fighting skills under controlled conditions. Trainees were paired off for sparring matches that would evaluate their ability to defend themselves and neutralize threats without weapons. Brett saw this as his opportunity to finally expose Emily's limitations. Physical combat was where his size and strength advantages would be most pronounced, and he was confident that whatever tricks had carried her through the shooting exercises wouldn't help her in a fight. Captain Brooks had positioned himself where he could observe the sparring matches, and his subtle nod confirmed that he wanted Brett to take full advantage of this opportunity. If Emily suffered an injury during training, a common occurrence in hand-to-hand combat, it would provide a convenient excuse for her medical withdrawal from the program. "Carter," Brett announced as the pairing assignments were made. "You're with me." The physical disparity between them was immediately obvious to everyone present. Brett stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed at least 220 pounds of muscle and military conditioning. Emily was maybe 5 feet 6 inches and probably weighed 130 pounds soaking wet. In terms of pure physical capabilities, it wasn't even a fair match. Instructor Murphy approached them before the sparring began, his expression concerned. "Morrison, I want a clean match. No unnecessary force, no attempts to prove points. The objective is to demonstrate technical proficiency, not to dominate your opponent." Brett nodded, but his grin suggested he had no intention of holding back. "Of course, sir. I'll be gentle with the princess." Emily said nothing, but she began stretching with movements that seemed almost too fluid, too precise. Her flexibility was remarkable, suggesting years of dedicated physical training that went far beyond casual fitness routines. When she moved through combat stances during her warm-up, the positions were textbook perfect, the kind of form that only came from endless repetition under expert instruction. The sparring area was marked out on the gymnasium floor, with safety mats and clear boundaries. Other trainees gathered around to watch, their phones out to record what they expected would be a quick and one-sided demonstration of Brett's physical superiority. Madison Brooks had positioned herself for optimal camera angles, her live stream already drawing viewers who were eager to see how this unlikely confrontation would unfold. Her commentary was excited and anticipatory, building up the drama for her social media audience. "Okay, family, this is it," she said into her phone. "David versus Goliath, except David looks like she should be modeling evening gowns instead of throwing punches. I honestly don't know what Emily's thinking here, but Brett's about to show everyone why size matters in combat sports." The referee, Sergeant Palmer, a compact man with decades of military combatives training, called the fighters to the center of the mat. He reviewed the rules quickly. Submissions or clean knockdowns would end the match, excessive force would result in disqualification, and all techniques had to comply with military combatives regulations. "Fighters ready?" Palmer asked, looking between Brett and Emily. Brett bounced on his toes, loosening his shoulders and rolling his neck like a boxer preparing for a title fight. His confidence was palpable, radiating from every line of his body. Emily stood perfectly still, her breathing slow and controlled, her eyes focused on some point beyond Brett's shoulder. She looked almost meditative, as if she was preparing for something entirely different from a physical confrontation. "Fight!" Palmer called, stepping back to give them room. Brett charged immediately, using his size advantage to try for a quick takedown. His strategy was simple: overwhelm Emily with aggressive grappling, use his weight to control the fight, and end things before she could demonstrate whatever technical skills she might possess. But Emily wasn't there when he arrived. She'd moved at the last possible second, a subtle sidestep that let Brett's momentum carry him past her position. As he rushed by, she placed one hand on his shoulder. Not a strike, just a gentle touch that redirected his movement and sent him stumbling off balance. Brett recovered quickly, wheeling around to face her again. But now, there was uncertainty in his eyes. Emily's movement had been too smooth, too precise. She hadn't looked surprised or panicked by his charge. She'd looked like someone who had faced this exact situation hundreds of times before. "Come on, princess," Brett taunted, trying to regain his psychological advantage. "Stop running and fight." Emily's response was delivered in the same quiet tone she'd used all day. "I'm not running." Brett attacked again, this time with more control and better technique. He threw a series of strikes designed to set up a grappling exchange, using his reach advantage to keep Emily at a distance where his power would be most effective. Emily's defensive responses were like nothing the observers had ever seen. She moved with an economy of motion that made Brett's attacks look clumsy by comparison, deflecting his strikes with minimal effort while maintaining perfect balance and positioning. It was like watching water flow around a rock. Brett's aggression simply passed through the spaces where Emily had been. But it was the small details that caught the attention of the more experienced observers. The way Emily's hands moved, not the wide, telegraphed blocks of someone learning self-defense, but the precise, minimal deflections of someone who'd mastered the art of redirecting force. The way she maintained distance, never too close to be overwhelmed, never too far to be ineffective. The way she breathed, controlled, measured, showing no signs of stress despite facing an opponent who outweighed her by 90 pounds. Private Jackson found himself leaning forward, fascinated by what he was witnessing. This wasn't a woman defending herself against a larger attacker. This was an expert demonstrating advanced techniques against an amateur who didn't understand what he was facing. Brett's frustration was building as his attacks continued to miss their mark. He was expending energy at an unsustainable rate, while Emily seemed to be barely exerting herself. Worse, he was beginning to look foolish in front of the gathered crowd, swinging at shadows while his supposedly helpless opponent danced just out of reach. "Stand still and fight!" he roared, launching himself forward in a wild tackle attempt. This time, Emily didn't dodge. Instead, she stepped into Brett's charge, her hands finding his extended arms with surgical precision. What happened next occurred so quickly that most observers missed the details, but the result was unmistakable. Brett's 220 pounds of muscle and aggression were suddenly airborne, flipping end over end before crashing to the mat with bone-jarring impact. The gymnasium fell completely silent. Brett lay on his back, stunned and gasping, while Emily stood over him with her hands at her sides, looking as composed as if she'd just finished a yoga class. Sergeant Palmer approached cautiously, checking Brett's condition before turning to Emily with an expression of professional amazement. "Ma'am, that was a perfect seoi nage throw. Where did you learn judo?" Emily's response was delivered with the same understated confidence she'd shown all day. "I've had some training." It was the kind of massive understatement that spoke volumes about whatever background she was hiding. The throw she'd executed was not something learned in weekend self-defense classes or civilian martial arts programs. It was a technique that required years of dedicated practice to perform safely, and decades of experience to execute with the kind of effortless precision Emily had displayed. Brett struggled to his feet, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and rapidly building rage. Everything he thought he knew about physical combat had just been challenged by a woman who looked like she should be afraid of breaking a nail. His worldview was cracking, and the cognitive dissonance was making him genuinely dangerous. "Lucky shot," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Let's go again." Sergeant Palmer looked between them, recognizing the warning signs of someone who was about to do something stupid. "Morrison, you've been thrown cleanly. The match is over." "No," Brett said, his voice rising. "She got lucky. I want a rematch." It was then that Captain Brooks made his move, striding onto the mat with an expression of apparent concern that masked his true intentions. "Perhaps we should examine this more carefully," he said, his voice carrying the authority of senior rank. That throw was executed with remarkable precision for someone with Emily's claimed background. The comment was delivered with surgical accuracy, designed to plant seeds of suspicion in the minds of everyone present. Brooks was gambling that Emily's cover story was thin enough to collapse under scrutiny, and that her demonstrated skills would raise questions about her true purpose at the facility. "Maybe it's time we got some honest answers about who you really are," Brooks continued, his gaze fixed on Emily's face. "Because nobody learns to fight like that without serious military training." Emily met his stare steadily, those captivating blue eyes revealing nothing. "I've already provided all necessary documentation, sir. My credentials have been verified." Brooks smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Credentials can be fabricated. Skills like yours tell a different story." The confrontation was drawing attention from across the gymnasium, with instructors and trainees gathering to witness what was becoming a serious challenge to Emily's presence at the facility. The atmosphere was electric with tension, charged with the knowledge that something significant was about to be revealed. Brett seized on Brooks's implied authorization, his anger finally finding an outlet. "She's been lying to all of us," he declared. "Nobody shoots like that, nobody fights like that, without professional training. She's some kind of spy or infiltrator." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, poisoning the atmosphere with paranoia and suspicion. Emily stood in the center of it all, still radiating that same quiet calm. But something had changed in her posture. The slightly defensive bearing she'd maintained all day was gone, replaced by something harder and more alert. That's a serious accusation, Commander Hayes said, arriving at the scene with the controlled urgency of someone who'd been monitoring the situation from a distance. Do you have any evidence to support it? Brett looked to Captain Brooks for support, but found only a carefully neutral expression that offered no help. Brooks was already distancing himself from the confrontation, recognizing that the situation was spiraling beyond his control. Look at her performance, Brett said desperately. Nobody civilian shoots perfect scores with sabotaged equipment. Nobody civilian throws trained fighters like they're children. She's been playing us all day. Commander Hayes studied Emily's face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. What he saw was the same pleasant composure she'd maintained since arriving at the facility, but now it struck him as professional rather than natural. This was the kind of calm that came from training, not temperament. Ms. Carter, Hayes said formally, perhaps you'd like to clarify some of the questions that have been raised about your background. Emily's response came without hesitation. I'm here to train, sir. Same as everyone else. It was the same answer she'd been giving all day, but now it sounded different in the charged atmosphere of the gymnasium. The crowd was beginning to murmur, theories and speculation building, as people tried to make sense of what they'd witnessed. Madison Brooks found herself at the center of a social media storm, her live stream viewership climbing toward 10,000 as word spread about the mysterious woman who was dominating elite military trainees. The comments section was exploding with theories and demands for answers that Madison couldn't provide. Private Jackson felt a growing sense of unease as he watched the situation develop. He'd come to respect Emily over the course of the day, and seeing her surrounded by hostile speculation made him uncomfortable. Whatever secrets she was hiding, he didn't believe she posed any threat to legitimate personnel. Maybe we should focus on facts instead of speculation, he said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. Emily's performance has been exceptional, but that doesn't make her a spy. Maybe she's just better than we expected. Brett whirled on him, his face flushed with anger and desperation. Don't let her fool you, Jackson. She's been manipulating all of us, playing weak and helpless while gathering intelligence on our training methods, our capabilities, our security protocols. The paranoia in Brett's voice was becoming obvious to everyone present, suggesting someone whose judgment had been compromised by personal animosity. But Captain Brooks saw an opportunity to exploit the situation, stepping forward with an expression of grave concern. Given the questions that have been raised, Brooks said, I think it would be appropriate to conduct a more thorough security check, for everyone's safety. It was a masterful manipulation, framing what was essentially harassment as a matter of national security. Brooks was betting that Emily's cover wouldn't survive intensive scrutiny, and that whatever agenda had brought her to his facility would be exposed before she could complete her mission. Commander Hayes nodded reluctantly. Very well. Ms. Carter, you'll need to submit to additional screening procedures. Until we can verify your background more thoroughly, you'll be restricted to base under security supervision. Emily accepted this pronouncement with the same serene composure she'd shown all day, but something flickered across her features, a momentary expression that suggested she was reassessing the situation through new filters. Of course, sir, she said quietly. I understand the need for security protocols. But as the crowd began to disperse and the immediate tension started to fade, Emily made a decision that would change everything. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, typing a brief message with movements that were too quick and precise for casual communication. The message was short, encrypted, and sent to a number that didn't exist in any civilian database. Phoenix compromised. Request immediate extraction. The response came back within seconds. Negative. Mission priority Alpha. Maintain cover until completion. Emily stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted both messages and returned the phone to her pocket. Whatever mission had brought her to the naval training facility was more important than her personal safety, and she would see it through regardless of the consequences. As the sun began to set over the facility, casting long shadows across the parade ground, the stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal truths that some people had spent years trying to hide. Emily Carter's cover was unraveling, but the person beneath that carefully constructed identity was far more dangerous than anyone present could imagine. And in the morning, when the answers finally emerged, they would transform everyone's understanding of courage, deception, and the price of truth in a world where appearances meant everything and reality meant death. The investigation into Captain Brooks's corruption network would require advanced legal expertise in military justice proceedings and federal criminal law. specialized legal consulting firms focusing on defense contractor fraud and military whistleblower protection offered comprehensive services including evidence analysis, witness protection coordination, and complex federal prosecution support that could determine the outcome of high-stakes corruption cases. If this revelation just gave you chills, you need to see my next video about another woman who completely fooled everyone around her. Click that subscribe button and check the description for more incredible stories like this one that'll restore your faith in hidden heroes. The next morning broke gray and cold, with the kind of overcast sky that seemed to promise revelation or reckoning. Emily Carter stood in formation with the other trainees, but the dynamic had shifted overnight. Word of the previous day's confrontations had spread throughout the facility, creating an atmosphere of tension and speculation that charged every interaction with significance. Brett Morrison looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes bloodshot, and his usually pristine uniform showing signs of careless preparation. The doubts that Captain Brooks had planted in his mind had taken root and grown into full-blown paranoia, consuming his thoughts and poisoning his judgment. Commander Hayes had spent the night reviewing security protocols and classified databases, searching for any clue that might explain Emily's presence at his facility. His investigation had raised more questions than answers, but one thing was becoming clear. Emily Carter was not who she claimed to be. "Listen up, people," Hayes announced to the assembled trainees. "Today's exercise is advanced urban warfare simulation, live ammunition, realistic scenarios, and zero tolerance for safety violations. This is as close to combat conditions as we can create in a training environment." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the formation. When his eyes found Emily, they carried a weight of suspicion that hadn't been there before. "Teams will be assigned randomly," Hayes continued, consulting his clipboard. "No predetermined partnerships, no familiar working relationships. You'll need to establish trust and communication with unfamiliar personnel under stress conditions." The team assignments were announced, and Emily found herself grouped with 3 trainees she'd barely interacted with during her time at the facility. The randomization was clearly intentional, designed to isolate her from anyone who might have developed sympathy for her position. The urban warfare simulation facility was a full-scale replica of a Middle Eastern city, complete with multi-story buildings, narrow alleyways, and civilian populations represented by role-playing actors. The scenario was complex. Terrorist cells had taken control of several buildings, hostages were being held at multiple locations, and intelligence suggested the presence of improvised explosive devices throughout the area. Emily's team leader was Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a compact man with intense dark eyes and the kind of quiet competence that came from actual combat experience. He studied Emily with professional interest as they reviewed their mission briefing. "Carter," he said, "I've heard some interesting things about your performance yesterday. Today I want to see what you can really do." Emily nodded, accepting the challenge without comment. She checked her weapon and equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown all week, but there was something different in her bearing now. The slightly defensive posture was gone, replaced by the alert readiness of someone preparing for actual combat. As they moved into the simulation area, Emily's transformation became even more pronounced. She didn't just navigate the urban environment, she owned it, moving through streets and buildings with the fluid confidence of someone who'd done this for real. Her tactical awareness was extraordinary, seeming to sense threats before they materialized and positioning herself to maximum advantage without conscious thought. When they encountered their first simulated enemy contact, Emily's response was instantaneous and devastating. Her rifle was on target and firing before the opposing team had even identified her position, and her shots were placed with surgical precision that neutralized threats without endangering nearby civilians. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found himself impressed despite his initial skepticism. "Carter, where did you serve?" he asked during a brief lull in the action. "I haven't served, Sergeant," Emily replied, scanning the rooftops for potential sniper positions. "This is my first time at a military facility." Rodriguez stared at her in disbelief. What he was witnessing couldn't be explained by civilian training, no matter how extensive. Emily's tactical instincts, her weapon handling, her ability to read the battlefield, these were skills that took years to develop in actual combat conditions. "That's impossible," Rodriguez said flatly. "Nobody moves like that without extensive military experience." Emily's only response was to signal for silence as she detected movement in a building ahead of them. Her hand signals were textbook perfect, the kind of precise communication that allowed small units to coordinate without verbal commands. Rodriguez found himself following her lead, despite his higher rank, recognizing superior tactical expertise when he saw it. The simulation continued with Emily's team achieving objective after objective with mechanical efficiency. Her performance was so consistently exceptional that it began to attract attention from the exercise controllers, who found themselves dealing with scenarios that were being resolved faster than their training protocols anticipated. Captain Brooks monitored the exercise from the command center, his concern growing with each success Emily's team achieved. She wasn't just performing well, she was dominating the exercise with capabilities that suggested professional military training of the highest caliber. If she was an investigator, her presence at his facility was an existential threat to everything he'd built. He activated his secure communication system and sent a coded message to Brett Morrison, who was participating in a different sector of the simulation. The message was brief but clear. Phase 3 authorized. Implement immediately. Brett received the message during a lull in his team's operations, and his face hardened with grim satisfaction. Phase 3 was the contingency plan he and Brooks had discussed, a way to eliminate the Emily problem permanently while making it look like a training accident. The urban warfare simulation included scenarios with simulated improvised explosive devices designed to test decision-making under extreme pressure. Brett's mission was to modify one of these devices, making it more realistic and potentially more dangerous than safety protocols normally allowed. As the afternoon progressed, Emily's team moved deeper into the simulation area, their success rate drawing increasing attention from observers and exercise controllers. They had cleared 6 buildings, rescued multiple hostages, and neutralized over a dozen simulated terrorists without sustaining any casualties. But it was Emily's leadership during a complex building clearance that finally convinced Staff Sergeant Rodriguez that he was working with someone extraordinary. She had anticipated every enemy position, predicted every tactical move, and coordinated their response with the kind of precision that spoke to years of similar experiences. "Carter," Rodriguez said during a brief tactical pause, "I don't know who you really are, but I know you're not a civilian. That kind of tactical awareness doesn't come from training courses." Emily met his gaze steadily, and for a moment Rodriguez thought she might finally reveal the truth. But then the familiar mask slipped back into place. "I'm just doing my best, Sergeant," she said quietly. Rodriguez was about to press the issue when an explosion erupted from the building they were approaching. It was supposed to be a simulated blast, part of the training scenario, but something was wrong. The sound was too loud, the debris too real, and the smoke carried the acrid smell of actual explosives rather than harmless pyrotechnics. "That wasn't simulated," Rodriguez said, his combat instincts immediately alert to genuine danger. Emily was already moving, her rifle up and ready as she scanned for threats. The explosion had come from the building where Brett Morrison's team was supposed to be conducting clearance operations, and the implications were immediately obvious to anyone with tactical experience. "Possible blue-on-blue incident," Emily reported into her radio, using the military term for friendly fire casualties. "Request immediate medical support and exercise suspension." But even as she called for help, Emily was moving toward the building where the explosion had occurred. Her team followed, recognizing her natural authority, despite her supposed civilian status. They found Brett Morrison stumbling out of the building, his uniform torn and his face covered with dust and small cuts. Behind him, 2 other team members were helping a third who appeared to be injured. "What happened?" Rodriguez demanded. Brett's response was confused and panicked. "IED went off unexpectedly. Johnson took shrapnel to the leg. The device wasn't supposed to be that powerful." Emily was already moving toward the injured trainee, her hands finding medical supplies with the automatic response of someone who'd treated combat casualties before. Her first aid techniques were advanced, professional, and executed with the kind of calm efficiency that only came from extensive experience. "Arterial bleeding controlled," she reported as she worked. "Patient stable, but needs immediate evacuation to medical facility." Johnson looked up at her through pain-clouded eyes. "Ma'am, are you a medic?" Emily's hands never paused in their work as she continued treating his wounds. "I've had some training," she said, using the same understated response she'd employed all week. But Rodriguez was watching her technique, and what he saw convinced him beyond any doubt that Emily Carter was not what she appeared to be. Her medical skills were too advanced, too professional, too automatic. She was treating a combat casualty with the competence of someone who'd done it hundreds of times before. Medical personnel arrived within minutes, taking over Johnson's care and evacuating him to the base hospital. As they worked, the senior medic looked at Emily's treatment with professional appreciation. "Excellent work," he told her. "Textbook combat casualty care. Where did you train?" Emily's response was the same non-answer she'd been giving all week, but now it carried a different weight. The accumulation of her demonstrated skills was reaching a critical mass that would soon demand explanations. As the medical team departed with Johnson, Captain Brooks arrived at the scene with an expression of apparent concern that masked his true feelings. The explosion had been stronger than intended, and now there were witnesses to Emily's advanced medical capabilities that would raise additional questions about her background. "What's the status?" Brooks asked, surveying the scene. "One casualty, stable condition," Rodriguez reported. "Carter here provided excellent first aid that probably saved Johnson's life." Brooks looked at Emily with carefully controlled interest. "Impressive medical skills for a civilian. Where did you learn trauma care?" "First aid courses," Emily replied, but her tone suggested she was growing tired of the deception. The explosion had also attracted the attention of Commander Hayes, who arrived with a team of investigators to determine what had gone wrong with the exercise. The preliminary assessment suggested equipment malfunction, but Hayes was beginning to suspect something more complicated. As the investigation continued, Private Jackson found an opportunity to speak with Emily privately. He'd been watching the day's events with growing concern, recognizing that the situation was becoming dangerous for everyone involved. "Emily," he said quietly, "I think you need to know that something's not right here. The explosion, Brett's behavior, Captain Brooks's involvement, it all feels orchestrated." Emily studied his face, seeing genuine concern and loyalty that touched something deep inside her carefully maintained professional facade. "Thank you for the warning," she said. "I appreciate your friendship more than you know." Jackson wanted to ask more questions, to understand what was really happening, but Emily's expression suggested that explanations weren't possible. Instead, he offered what protection he could. "Whatever you're really doing here, I hope you succeed. And if you need help, you know where to find me." Emily's smile was warm and genuine, revealing glimpses of the person behind the professional mask. "You're a good soldier, Private Jackson. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As evening approached, Emily found herself back in her quarters, processing the day's events and planning her next moves. The explosion had confirmed her worst suspicions about Captain Brooks's involvement in whatever conspiracy she'd been sent to investigate. The corruption was deeper and more dangerous than anyone had suspected. She activated her secure communication device and sent another encrypted message. "Target confirmed hostile. Require immediate support." The response came back within minutes. "Support team en route. Maintain position and gather final evidence." Emily stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and prepared for what she knew would be the most dangerous phase of her mission. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, and when it was over, the truth about Captain Brooks's operation would finally be exposed. But first, she had to survive the night. As darkness settled over the naval training facility, Emily Carter made her final preparations. The woman who had been dismissed as a lost civilian was about to reveal herself as something far more dangerous, and the people who had underestimated her were about to learn the true meaning of lethal force. The morning of reckoning had arrived, and Emily Carter was ready for war. The final day dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant sunshine that seemed to promise either triumph or catastrophe. Emily Carter stood in formation with the other trainees, but everything about the situation had changed overnight. The atmosphere was electric with tension, charged with the knowledge that secrets were about to be revealed and reckonings delivered. Brett Morrison looked haggard and desperate, his paranoia having evolved into something approaching madness. The previous day's explosion had shaken him more than he had expected, and Captain Brooks's increasingly urgent instructions were pushing him toward actions that his rational mind recognized as dangerous. Commander Hayes had spent the night in emergency meetings with base security, reviewing Emily's background and coordinating with federal agencies whose interest in the situation suggested complexities far beyond anything he'd anticipated. The investigation had revealed layers of deception and misdirection that painted a picture of professional intelligence operations. Today's final exercise, Hayes announced to the assembled group, will be a comprehensive evaluation of all skills demonstrated during the training cycle, individual performance assessments, team coordination exercises, and stress testing under simulated combat conditions. He paused, his gaze finding Emily's face in the formation. Additionally, we have some special observers joining us today, personnel from various agencies who are interested in our training methods and graduate capabilities. The announcement sent a ripple of curiosity through the assembled trainees, but Emily's expression didn't change. She'd expected this development, recognizing the signs of a carefully orchestrated operation reaching its conclusion. As the trainees dispersed to their assigned areas, Emily noticed the arrival of several black SUVs at the facility's main gate. The vehicles were unremarkable, except for their synchronized arrival and the way they positioned themselves for rapid departure. Professional transportation for professional people. Brett Morrison intercepted Emily as she headed toward the equipment shed, his face twisted with barely controlled aggression. "This is it, princess. Today everyone finds out what you really are." Emily looked at him with something approaching pity. "Yes," she said quietly. "They will." The response seemed to unsettle Brett more than any argument or denial would have. There was a finality in Emily's tone that suggested she was no longer interested in maintaining whatever game they'd been playing. Captain Brooks appeared at Emily's shoulder, his presence as calculated as everything else he'd done since her arrival. "Ms. Carter, I'd like you to join me for a special briefing. Some questions have arisen that require clarification." Emily nodded, following Brooks toward the administrative building. But as they walked, she made a subtle gesture with her left hand, a signal that would have meant nothing to civilian observers, but carried specific meaning for anyone with the right training to recognize it. The briefing room was small and windowless, designed for classified discussions that required complete privacy. Brooks positioned himself between Emily and the door, using his physical presence to create a sense of confinement and control. "Let's stop playing games," Brooks said, his professional mask finally slipping to reveal the desperation beneath. "I know you're not who you claim to be. I know you're here to investigate my operations. The question is, what's it going to take to make you disappear?" Emily's response was delivered with the same quiet composure she'd maintained all week. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir. I'm here for training, same as everyone else." Brooks's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Right. A civilian who shoots like a professional sniper, fights like a special operations soldier, and provides trauma care like a combat medic. That's quite a coincidence." "I've had some training," Emily said, using her standard non-answer one final time. But Brooks was beyond accepting evasions. "Here's what I think happened. Someone in Washington got suspicious about my operation. They sent you here undercover to gather evidence. But what they didn't count on was how quickly I'd figure out what you really were." Emily tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. "And what am I, Captain?" "A federal agent, probably military intelligence, maybe criminal investigation division. Doesn't matter which alphabet agency sent you. What matters is that you're not leaving here alive." The threat was delivered with calm certainty, the words of someone who had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Brooks reached for his sidearm, but Emily was already moving. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. The woman who'd seemed vulnerable and uncertain all week disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with lethal precision. Emily's hand intercepted Brooks's weapon draw, trapping his pistol in its holster, while her other hand found pressure points that immediately neutralized his resistance. "Captain Brooks," Emily said, her voice carrying an authority that filled the small room, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and attempted murder of a federal officer." Brooks struggled against her grip, but Emily's technique was perfect. She'd positioned herself to control his weapon while maintaining complete leverage over his movement. Years of training in the most demanding environments in the world had prepared her for exactly this moment. "You can't prove anything," Brooks gasped. "It's your word against mine." Emily's smile was cold and professional. "Actually, I can prove everything. The conversation we just had was recorded. So were your instructions to Morrison regarding the modified explosive device. And your financial records have been under surveillance for 6 months. The color drained from Brooks's face as he realized the extent of his exposure. "Who are you?" "Special Agent Emily Carter, Naval Criminal Investigative Service." "And Captain, you've been under investigation since the first reports of training irregularities reached Washington." The revelation hung in the air between them, finally explaining everything that had seemed impossible about Emily's presence and capabilities. She wasn't a civilian playing soldier. She was a federal law enforcement officer with specialized training who had been sent to infiltrate and expose Brooks's corruption network. A sharp knock on the briefing room door interrupted the confrontation. "Agent Carter, this is Agent Morrison, NCIS. We're in position." Emily called back without taking her eyes off Brooks. "Suspect in custody. Enter and secure." The door opened to reveal a team of federal agents in tactical gear, their weapons drawn and ready. Leading them was a tall man with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Captain Brooks," the lead agent announced formally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of federal officials, and attempted murder of a federal agent. You have the right to remain silent." As Brooks was read his rights and taken into custody, Emily finally allowed herself to relax slightly. The mission that had brought her to the naval training facility was complete, but she knew the consequences were just beginning. Outside the briefing room, news of Brooks's arrest was spreading through the facility like wildfire. Brett Morrison had been taken into custody simultaneously, his role in the conspiracy exposed through electronic surveillance that had documented every conversation with his handler. Commander Hayes found himself processing information that recontextualized everything he thought he knew about the past week. Emily Carter's extraordinary performance hadn't been the result of hidden military experience. It had been the natural capability of a federal agent with specialized training conducting an undercover operation. Private Jackson was among the first to understand what had really happened, and his reaction was a mixture of vindication and admiration. He had recognized Emily's quality from the beginning, even if he hadn't understood its true nature. "Holy cow," he said to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. "She really was the real deal, just not the way any of us expected." Rodriguez nodded, still processing his own observations from the urban warfare exercise. "That explains why she moved like she'd been in actual combat. NCIS agents get some of the best tactical training in the world." Madison Brooks found herself at the center of a social media storm as news of the federal investigation broke. Her live streams documenting Emily's failures had inadvertently captured evidence of a federal agent under deep cover, creating a narrative that was being shared across military social media networks. "Family," she said into her phone, her usual confidence replaced by genuine amazement. "I honestly don't know what to say. We've been watching a real-life federal investigation unfold, and I had no idea. Emily Carter isn't just skilled. She's a legitimate federal agent who was here to catch corrupt officers." As the morning progressed, the full scope of Brooks's corruption network began to emerge. Financial records revealed millions of dollars in fraudulent contracts, kickbacks from defense contractors, and influence peddling that had compromised training programs across multiple facilities. Emily found herself debriefing with her NCIS supervisors, reviewing the evidence she'd gathered and preparing for the legal proceedings that would follow. The undercover operation had been more successful than anyone had anticipated, exposing corruption that reached far beyond the naval training facility. "Outstanding work, Agent Carter," her supervisor said during the debriefing. "The evidence you have gathered will put Brooks away for decades and clean up corruption networks that have been operating for years." Emily nodded, but her expression remained professional. "What about the trainees, Jackson, Rodriguez, the others who got caught up in this? Clean records for everyone who wasn't directly involved in the conspiracy. Jackson will probably get commended for his integrity under pressure. Rodriguez is being recommended for advanced leadership training. It was the outcome Emily had hoped for. Justice for the corrupt officers while protecting the innocent personnel who had been manipulated by the conspiracy." As afternoon approached, Emily prepared to leave the naval training facility. Her mission was complete, and the experience had reminded her why federal law enforcement mattered. She was packing her gear when Jackson approached, his expression mixing respect and curiosity. "Agent Carter," he said formally, "I wanted to thank you for what you did here." Emily's smile was warm and genuine. "You showed integrity when it mattered, Private. That's more valuable than you know." Jackson asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Were you really struggling with the training at first?" Emily's laugh was surprisingly musical. "I was definitely struggling. Federal agent training doesn't include intentionally missing targets. That was the hardest part of the whole mission." Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message that carried the highest priority classification. "Agent Carter," the message read, "intelligence indicates terrorist cell planning embassy attack. Your undercover capabilities requested for immediate deployment." Emily stared at the message, recognizing the familiar weight of duty, calling her to another dangerous assignment. "Private," she said to Jackson, How would you feel about a transfer to a joint federal task force? We could use someone with your integrity." Jackson's eyes widened with excitement. "Ma'am, I'd be honored." Emily smiled. "Pack your gear. We leave in 6 hours." As the black SUVs prepared to depart, Emily Carter took one last look at the place where she'd spent a week being underestimated and challenged. The mission had been successful beyond all expectations, but more importantly, it had reminded her that honor and courage could be found in the most unexpected places. The woman who'd arrived as a supposedly inexperienced civilian was leaving as a federal agent with a new partner and a new mission that would test her skills in entirely different ways. The truth about Emily Carter had finally been revealed, but the legend of Phoenix was just beginning.